What I learned when the avoidant ghosted after intimacy is that your body does not experience it like ordinary rejection. It experiences it like rupture after opening. That is why it can feel so impossible to shake. If someone is distant from the start, it hurts, but there is still a part of you that knows where you stand. When someone gets deeply close, softens, opens, lets you feel them, lets you think something real just happened, and then disappears, your body does not know where to put that. It keeps going back to the last real moment and asking what changed, what I missed, which version was true, the closeness or the silence. And one of the hardest things I learned is that sometimes both were true. The intimacy may have been real, and the ghosting may also have been real. The softness may have been genuine, and the shutdown may have been genuine too. That is what makes this pattern so disorienting. It does not feel like a clean ending. It feels like your nervous system got opened and then left exposed. That is why I wanted to do this through the nervous system lens, because if you only look at it as a dating problem, you miss the part that actually keeps people stuck. The body is not just reacting to rejection. The body is reacting to closeness, followed by disappearance. And that is a very different kind of pain. If this kind of clarity helps your nervous system settle, subscribe. PsychBond is a daily decoder for psychology, relationships, and avoidant and anxious attachment patterns, so you stop guessing. One of the first things I learned the hard way is that when an avoidant ghosts after intimacy, the trap is trying to prove that the intimacy meant something. You keep replaying the moment because you want to know it was real. You want to know you did not imagine it. You want to know the vulnerability was mutual, the chemistry was mutual, the softness was mutual, the bond was real. But what I eventually realized is that even if the intimacy was completely real, that still does not answer the more important question. The more important question is whether this person knows how to handle what intimacy means after it happens. That is the question that protects you. Not whether they felt a lot, whether they know how to stay in reality after they feel a lot. Not whether the night was real, whether they know how to live in the daylight after the night was real. That shift changed everything for me, because as long as I was obsessed with proving the intimacy mattered, I stayed trapped in the wrong question. The real danger was never only the intensity of the moment. The real danger was what happened right after. Another thing I learned is that intimacy can feel good and threatening at the same time for an avoidant person. This is what makes the pattern so confusing from the outside. You think if the moment was real, if they were warm, open, connected, tender, emotional, affectionate, or vulnerable, then naturally the relationship should move closer after that. But for someone with strong avoidant wiring, closeness does not only create warmth. It can also create pressure, responsibility, exposure, fear of expectation, fear of being needed, fear of now having to sustain what they just opened, and fear of now being emotionally visible in a way they cannot control. So, in the intimate moment, they may actually be fully there. That is the part people miss. The softness can be real. The wall may really have come down. The chemistry may be real. The tenderness may be real. The bonding may be real. But later, after the moment is over, their nervous system may start reading the meaning of what just happened instead of simply the feeling of it. Now this means something. Now I am exposed. Now they may expect something from me. Now there is weight. Now there is risk. Now I care more than feels safe. And that is when retreat can begin. That is why ghosting after intimacy can feel so cruel and so impossible to make sense of. To the person receiving it, it feels like the closeness was a lie. To the avoidance system, the ghosting may feel like a way to get oxygen back. I am not saying that makes it okay. It does not. I am saying that if you do not understand the nervous system's state change, you will keep personalizing it in ways that destroy your self-worth. That was another brutal lesson for me. I had to learn not to build a whole self-concept around somebody else's underdeveloped capacity. If intimacy activates something they cannot hold, that is not proof that you were too much. It is proof that intimacy touched something they do not know how to regulate. And if you keep making that your fault, you will slowly train yourself to become smaller, quieter, easier, and less real, just to try to avoid being ghosted again. But becoming smaller does not create real safety. It just creates a dimmer version of the same unstable bond. Another thing I learned is that your nervous system reads ghosting after intimacy differently than ordinary distance. This part matters because it explains why it can feel so obsessive. If someone is vaguely unavailable from the beginning, you can still get attached, but some part of you knows the instability is built into the connection. Ghosting after intimacy is different because the body had just received a cue of mutuality, maybe even a cue of safety. Your body was orienting toward closeness. It was opening. It was softening. It was starting to hold more meaning. Then suddenly the person disappears. So the body does not just feel disappointed, it feels ruptured. It keeps trying to close a loop that the other person abandoned. That is why you replay everything. The conversation, the eye contact, the words, the shift, the touch, the softness, the thing they said that made it all feel real. The body is trying to build a bridge between that and the silence that followed. And because there is no clean bridge, the mind starts inventing explanations. Maybe I said too much. Maybe I moved too fast. Maybe I made it too real. Maybe they got scared. Maybe they are ashamed. Maybe they changed their mind. Maybe I read it wrong. That spiral is not just overthinking. It is your nervous system trying to resolve an interrupted attachment event. That is why ghosting after intimacy can feel humiliating and addictive at the same time. You are not only missing the person, you are trying to complete the interrupted state. You are trying to make the moment make sense again. That was one of the most important things I had to understand. Sometimes what feels like longing is actually nervous system urgency. You think you want them, but part of what you want is for the open circuit to close. You want contact because contact feels like resolution. And when you do not know that, you can start treating the breaker of the rhythm like the only person who can heal the rhythm. That is a dangerous setup. One of the hardest lessons in this pattern is learning that the person who created the rupture is not always the person who can repair the rupture. Another thing I learned is that a lot of avoidant ghosting after intimacy is less planned than it looks. People often imagine it as intentionally cruel, and sometimes maybe it is, but often it is more automatic. Something got too real, too charged, too exposing, and instead of staying inside that discomfort and naming it, they escaped it. That can look like delayed replies, flattened tone, acting normal in a weirdly cold way, disappearing for days, going silent, becoming practical, or just vanishing. It can feel calculated when you are on the receiving end because it happens right after closeness. But sometimes what is happening is emotional hangover. In the moment, the person may feel connected and open. Later, when the system settles, the weight of that openness lands. Now I am seen. Now this matters. Now there may be expectation. Now there is pressure. And instead of talking about that, they get distance back into the system as fast as they can. This is what makes it so damaging for the person on the other side. The body thinks intimacy means deepen. The avoidant system often feels intimacy and then wants to reduce pressure. So the same event is being metabolized in completely opposite directions. That is why these experiences are so hard to narrate to yourself in a sane way. Another thing that became clear to me is that shame plays a huge role here. People do not talk about this enough. Avoidant people often carry a lot of shame around vulnerability, need, dependence, emotional exposure, wanting too much, feeling too much, and letting someone see too much. So, if they were especially open, tender, emotional, sexual, affectionate, or honest, the aftermath may not just be overwhelm, it may be shame. And shame usually hides by disappearing. It does not say, "I feel exposed." It just goes quiet. It does not say, "I regret getting so open." It just becomes distant. It does not say, "I care, and that scares me." It just acts like nothing happened. To the person receiving that, it feels like whiplash. You think, how can someone be that real and then that absent? But the answer is often that the intimacy was real and the shame was real too. Again, not okay. But much easier to understand once you stop forcing yourself into a simple story. Another thing I learned is that ghosting after intimacy can train your body to become suspicious of closeness itself. This part is devastating. If it happens enough times, the body starts learning that good moments are not safe. You stop receiving intimacy cleanly. You start bracing during it. A beautiful night does not just feel beautiful. Some part of you starts waiting for the drop. A tender conversation does not just feel bonding. Some part of you starts thinking, how long until they go weird? You start scanning after the softness instead of resting in it. And once that conditioning starts, it becomes much harder to tell the difference between intuition and fear. You think you are just wiser now. But sometimes what is happening is that your nervous system has learned to associate closeness with rupture. That is why healing from this pattern is not just about getting over a person. It is about teaching your body that intimacy does not always have to end in collapse. But you cannot teach your body that by pretending the pattern is fine. You teach your body that by taking the pattern seriously enough that you stop offering it fresh access to your openness unless something is actually changed. One of the ugliest traps in this whole dynamic is that you can start thinking the answer is to become less real, less expressive, less deep, less moved, less attached, less honest. But that is the wrong lesson. The wrong conclusion from avoidant ghosting is that you need to become easier to ghost. That is self-abandonment disguised as growth. What I had to learn is that the healthier move is not becoming less real. It is becoming more selective about who gets access to that reality. Another thing I learned is that after ghosting, it is very easy to get trapped in proving the intimacy was real instead of evaluating the pattern that followed it. This is where people lose months. They want confirmation. They want acknowledgement. They want the person to come back and validate that the night meant something. The closeness meant something. The vulnerability meant something. But even if the person did come back and say, yes, it meant something, that still would not answer the deeper question. Can they handle what it means when intimacy becomes real? That is why proving the moment mattered does not actually save you. The person can validate the moment and still repeat the pattern. They can say beautiful things and still disappear again. They can miss you and still not know how to stay. That was one of the most sobering lessons for me. Meaning is not enough. Chemistry is not enough. Vulnerability is not enough. Missing you is not enough. The standard has to become different. Not, did it mean something? Can they hold what it means? That is the difference between getting lost in the meaning of intimacy and actually protecting your nervous system from the structure that follows it. Another thing that matters is the difference between return and repair. A return is not repair. A warm message after ghosting is not repair. Missing you is not repair. Coming back because they feel loss or loneliness or curiosity is not repair. Repair means the person can acknowledge what happened, tolerate the emotional truth of it, and show enough changed behavior that your body is not left carrying the rupture alone. That is completely different. This is where people often get re-traumatized. The avoidant comes back, the anxious body floods with relief, and suddenly the real question disappears because the nervous system is so grateful the person returned. The body thinks, thank God, I am not abandoned. I do not have to finish the grief. But that relief can make you skip the harder questions. What happened after intimacy? Why did you disappear? What do you do when things get emotionally real? Are you capable of staying when you get overwhelmed? Are you willing to name this pattern, not just restart the bond? Those questions are the difference between re-entry into the same loop and something actually changing. If the return cannot survive those questions, then the pattern is still stronger than the closeness. Another thing I learned is that you can protect the complexity of the avoidant person so much that you start abandoning the reality of your own experience. You think, but they were scared, but they care, but they are avoidant, but they got overwhelmed, but the moment was real. Maybe all of that is true, but you can hold their complexity so tightly that you stop holding your own pain clearly. You can believe they were scared and still tell the truth that you got dropped. You can believe they cared and still tell the truth that the pattern is not safe. You can believe the intimacy mattered and still tell the truth that disappearing after intimacy is not something your nervous system should be asked to normalize. This is where maturity lives. Not in flattening them into a villain, and not in flattening your own pain into patience. Both can be true. The closeness may have been real. The pattern may still be unacceptable. Another thing that changed everything for me was learning what actual change would look like. It would not just look like them coming back warm. It would look like them being able to acknowledge the ghosting without minimizing it. It would look like them not punishing me for intimacy we both participated in. It would look like them being able to stay present through the emotional aftermath instead of escaping it. It would look like them learning to name overwhelm before it becomes disappearance. It would look like the next intimate moment not being followed by the same withdrawal. That is proof. Not the chemistry, not the tenderness, not the one beautiful text 3 weeks later. Proof is what changes after the kind of moment that used to trigger ghosting. That is the real standard. Not, did the intimacy move them? Did it become something they knew how to carry afterward? And maybe that is the deepest lesson in this whole thing. The goal is no longer to decode the intimacy. The goal is to watch the structure that follows intimacy. Meaning is seductive. Meaning says, but that night was real. Meaning says, but they looked at me like this. Meaning says, but they said that thing. Meaning says, but nobody could fake that. Maybe all of that is true. But structure asks the harder question. And then what? Then what happened after the moment became real in daylight? Then what did the person do with the closeness they opened? Then what did your nervous system have to carry alone? If the answer keeps being ghosting, flattening, silence, ambiguity, or emotional collapse, then the structure is telling you the truth, no matter how beautiful the night was. That is why I wanted this to be a nervous system lesson and not just a heartbreak lesson. Because if you only see it romantically, you will keep measuring the bond by how intense the intimacy felt. When you look at it through the nervous system lens, you start asking whether the relationship creates regulation or rupture after closeness. That question changes everything. Because one thing I had to learn is that after ghosting, I was not only longing for the person, I was longing for completion of the interrupted state. I wanted the moment to make sense. I wanted the open circuit to close. I wanted contact because contact felt like the missing answer. But the real healing did not come from getting more contact from the person who broke the rhythm. The real healing came from learning not to treat the breaker of the rhythm as the healer of the rhythm. That is a brutal lesson, but it saves people. If someone repeatedly ghosts after intimacy, then every new intimate moment should count less as evidence and more as information. Not because you stop feeling, because you stop volunteering your nervous system for a pattern that is not shown it can hold what it opens. Another thing that became clear to me is that the urge to chase after this kind of ghosting is often strongest exactly because the last moment was good. The better the last moment was, the more the body thinks the answer must still be in there somewhere. It thinks, if I can just get back to that version of them, then everything will make sense again. But that is how people get bonded to glimpses instead of reality. They keep reaching for the intimate version and minimizing the disappearing version, as if one is the real person and the other is the exception. What I learned is that both are part of the pattern until something proves otherwise. If someone repeatedly opens and then vanishes, the opening is not more real than the vanishing. The whole sequence is the truth. And there was another lesson buried in that for me. The nervous system loves contrast. Cold and then warm. Distance and then tenderness. Silence and then intense attention. That contrast can make the warm moment feel even bigger than it really is. So sometimes, what makes the intimacy feel so unforgettable is not only that it was deep, it is that it arrived after deprivation. And when warmth arrives after deprivation, the body tends to attach hard. It does not just enjoy it, it clings to it. That is why these patterns can become so sticky. They train your system to experience relief as proof of profound meaning, when sometimes relief is simply what happens when tension lifts for a minute. There is one more thing I learned that I wish more people knew. Sometimes the most painful part is not even the ghosting itself. It is what the ghosting makes you do to your own mind. You start bargaining with reality. You start editing the memory. You start protecting the other person from the meaning of what they did. You start talking yourself out of your own pain because the intimate moment still feels too precious to stain. But if a moment is only beautiful when you refuse to include what came after it, then your nervous system is paying the price for a fantasy version of the bond. Real evaluation has to include the full sequence: the closeness, the opening, the tenderness, and the disappearance. All of it is the data. And one more thing. Ghosting after intimacy can make you think the problem is that you asked too much, moved too fast, got too open, or ruined the moment by letting it matter. Usually, that is not the real problem. The real problem is that the other person could not metabolize what the intimacy activated in them. Do not build a whole self-concept around somebody else's underdeveloped capacity. That is another way people lose themselves. They start shrinking to become easier to hold, less deep, less expressive, less attached, less real. But if the intimacy was enough to activate ghosting, becoming smaller will not create true safety. It will only create a more muted version of the same unstable pattern. And that is not a win. So let us bring it down clearly. What I learned when the avoidant ghosted after intimacy is that the intimacy being real does not automatically make the pattern safe. Sometimes the intimacy was real enough to activate fear, shame, overwhelm, exposure, or the need to regain control. Your nervous system reads that ghosting as rupture after bonding, which is why it feels so hard to release. The trap is trying to prove the intimacy meant something instead of asking whether the person can handle what intimacy means after it happens. That is the real question. Not did the night matter? Did the person know how to stay in reality after the night mattered? If they do not, then your body will keep getting opened and dropped in the same place. And once you see that, the goal shifts. The goal is no longer to decode the intimacy. The goal is to stop calling that pattern closeness. Real closeness does not just open, it stays. Real closeness does not punish you for what both people felt. Real closeness does not vanish the moment the connection becomes emotionally expensive. And if this has happened to you, hear me clearly. You are not crazy for feeling confused. You are not weak for wanting contact after getting ghosted. You are not dramatic for feeling like it hit deeper than ordinary silence. Your nervous system is responding to rupture after openness. That is real. But the thing that saves you is not proving the intimacy mattered. It is learning to ask whether the person can hold what they opened without disappearing. That is the nervous system lens. That is the question that protects you. And that is how you stop mistaking intimacy for safety when the structure after intimacy is still teaching your body to brace. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.